Guðrún Guðmundsdóttir,
Vigfús Eiríksson,
Auðrúsa Eyjólfsdóttir,
Sesselja Vigfúsdóttir,
Eiríkur Eiríksson,
María Guðmundsdóttir,
Guðmunda Jónsdóttir,
Rósa Jóhanna Sigríður
Valgerður
Jónsdóttir,
Björnsdóttir,
Marí Benediktsdóttir,
Guðný Erasmusdóttir,
Guðmundur Guðmundsson.
I think it is important that you really want to understand where you come from, what your ancestors stood for.
We're all interconnected. And I feel like my grandfather, my father, we're all connected.
Somebody's been down the road before us. Somebody has made it safely to the other side. And I think that gives a lot of hope.
You who have descended from great and faithful forebears, with the blood of the Vikings in your veins, I know of no other group in the church which has kept as you have done the association of your homeland fathers with the land in which this generation now lives. It is a wonderful thing because it speaks of appreciation and love and respect for those who've gone before.
When Brigham Young, along with several hundred Latter-day Saints, arrived in Utah in 1847, the prophet declared it a new gathering place, their new Zion. In decades following, thousands of members from all over the world would tread in the footsteps of these early pioneers. The majority of these Latter-day Saint immigrants came from the British Isles and Scandinavia, all reaching Salt Lake City after months at sea and on foot. Upon arrival, Brigham Young directed them to settle specific regions within Utah. A unique group of saints were among the first to leave their small and isolated country in the North Atlantic. In contrast to the immigrants of mainland Europe and Scandinavia, nearly all of these saints settled in one place, Spanish Fork, Utah. They are the Saints of Iceland. This mesmerizing island near the Arctic Circle is known for its stark geological contrasts. With active volcanoes and vast ice fields, it has often been called the land of fire and ice. As unique as the country of Iceland itself, the message of Mormonism reached its coast through an unconventional route. It would not be the capital city of Reykjavik or mainland Iceland that would first embrace the gospel, but a small island off the southeast coast called Vestmannaeyjar, or the Westman Islands. From this tiny fishing village, more than half of the total converts of Iceland would emerge. Around 200 inhabitants joined the Mormon faith and emigrated to Spanish Fork, Utah.
Why do we have more than half of the converts to Mormonism coming from this small island, representing less than 1% of the landmass of Iceland? Perhaps the answer lies in the setting behind me as we look at the crashing sea. Here on this island represented the greatest industry, which was fishing for these people. Wives would send their dearly beloved husbands to sea, not knowing if they would return or not.
When they were going out to sea, they would pray, and God was close to them, and they felt the need to have God close to them. And they would go out in still weathers and then come back, and there'd be a storm, and boats would often tip over close to shore, leaving many widows, and they would drown just a few feet off the shore. It was very sad, but people were very close, and they needed God. I think they were much more open for the gospel at that time.
Though many of the Westman Islanders eventually accepted the Mormon message, their conversion to this foreign faith was not easy. In fact, it was because of heavy persecution that many of these first converts were baptized in a small tide pool near the ocean, hidden from view. One of the first missionaries to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ to the island of Vestmannaeyjar was Icelander Gudmundur Gudmundsson. Born in poverty, the youngest of 10 siblings, Gudmundur decided to leave Iceland in 1845 to refine his skills as a goldsmith in Copenhagen.
I had only a few acquaintances and hardly any friends. Neither had I many possessions. I was finally able to become a goldsmith apprentice for 5 years, with the promise that if I satisfied my master, I would get a half-year's reduction, which I honestly received and was discharged with a good recommendation. In the meantime, I lodged with my good friend Thornin Haflidsson, who had recently become a journeyman cabinet maker. He was the first who talked to me about the wonderful sect called the Mormons. I promised I would come and hear them, which I did the following Sabbath. Brother Erastus Snow spoke. Even though his preaching was very hard to understand, his honest face radiated a fatherly love which made a deep impression on me. I decided right then that I would search their teachings. I prayed with a sincere heart and quickly became convinced of the truth and desired baptism.
After joining the Mormon faith, Thornin accompanied Gudmundur back to Iceland, where they began preaching the gospel on the Westman Islands on May 12, 1851.
Immediately after we set our feet on the land, we noticed that we were not as welcome as we normally would have been if we hadn't been Mormons. Our arrival was already announced over the whole land, and lies were made public in the country's newspapers. The people were strongly commanded not to receive us or listen to us speak.
Even though the Westman Islanders were instructed not to listen to the missionaries, it was just 2 weeks after their arrival that the first baptisms occurred. Outraged, the local sheriff, J.N. Abel, sent a letter to the governor of Iceland, informing him that Gudmundur and Thornin were turning the island upside down, and that many were congregating in secret. As Thornin and Gudmundur experienced more and more success, persecution on the Westman Islands continued to increase. One of the strongest forces of opposition was Thornin's own wife, who burned his books and threatened to drown herself if he would not denounce the Mormon faith. Ironically, in December, just a few months after his baptism, it was Thornin himself who drowned in a tragic fishing accident miles from the Westman Islands. In the spring of 1853, Elder John Lawrenson arrived from Copenhagen to replace Thornin and assist Gudmundur in missionary efforts. Persecution on the island persisted, and the saints continued to assemble in secrecy.
We approached this place one at a time in order to avoid being noticed by our persecutors. Here in nature's pure embrace, we raised our voices on high and prayed to the Father, in the name of Jesus, to bless this lovely spot, surrounded by these romantic mountain walls. We sang hymns, prayed and preached, and I translated Elder Lawrenson's words into Icelandic. All those who were present were subsequently baptized.
One of the first converts of the Westman Islands was Samuel Bjarnson. After accepting the gospel, Samuel, along with his wife Margaret and their friend Hilda Jonsdottir, would be the first to emigrate to Utah. They traveled from Iceland to Liverpool, then across the Atlantic to the port of New Orleans. Traveling up the Mississippi, they joined the Noah T. Gaiman Company and walked the remaining 1,400 miles, reaching the Salt Lake Valley on September 7, 1855. Upon their arrival, Brigham Young instructed Samuel to settle in the new township of Spanish Fork, 60 miles south of Salt Lake City.
These people first left Iceland and they were poor farmers and fishermen, very, very poor indeed. And Iceland at that time was the poorest country in Europe. Then they first sailed to Britain and then across the Atlantic to the east coast of the United States and then all the way across the United States into this miserable desert that Utah was at that time. And I think it shows the willpower and the determination and the character of these people, that they were so guided by their faith and their confidence and their vision that they decided to meet the challenges that met them here.
Between 1855 and 1914, over 400 Icelanders immigrated to Utah and settled in Spanish Fork. Although many of them were warmly embraced by their relatives as they arrived, their departure from Iceland was a different matter.
There were no hugs and kisses as they left. It was more resentment. You are abandoning us, you're leaving, you will not be Icelanders anymore. Once you leave Iceland to take up another nationality, you will cease to be Icelandic. So this message.
People who emigrated from Iceland, they were, by that very act, denying this. They were rejecting this beautiful, lovely country. So it was no wonder that it was some resentment.
I suppose it made them more determined to remain as Icelandic as they possibly could on foreign soil. That's why there was so much material written. If you read, if you speak, and if you write Icelandic, they believed we will preserve our heritage. And this is what has lasted well into the 21st century, and this is amazing.
I don't think an Icelander can ever escape being from Iceland, and there's always the hunger to return, always the desire to stay connected and to seek analogous circumstances away from the country, but a great sense of pride and belonging in a way that is unusual for other kinds of nationalism, I think.
If there's anything that typifies an Icelander, it's his willingness to work and to work hard. And I don't think there's any amount of sacrifice that he's not willing to do if he's hardest committed to it.
The Icelanders' commitment to hard work not only bore fruit in the temporal affairs of Spanish Fork, but in spiritual matters as well. Between 1873 and 1914, 23 native Icelanders were called to return to their homeland as missionaries. Among these first missionaries were Magnus Bjarnson, Loftur Jonsson, Einar Eriksson, and Thordor Didriksson. It was their combined missionary efforts that launched the wave of immigration, as nearly all new converts heeded the call to Zion. The congregation in Iceland was left with few members, and with the outbreak of World War I, headquarters in Salt Lake City closed the mission in Iceland. It would be 60 years before the church would formally return to the land of fire and ice. During this period, the Western Icelanders, as the Icelanders and their descendants in Spanish Fork were called, formed the Icelandic Association of Utah. They erected a lighthouse monument commemorating the first Icelandic immigrants.
The Icelandic monument was dedicated on August of 1938. That, to us as Western Icelanders, is as a lighthouse. It's a beacon of light for us to gather to. And because that monument was placed there, I think that's one of the big reasons that the Icelandic Association has ever been successful.
This association has stayed together for so many years because of this inner tie, I think, that people have to that country. You know, we get in these meetings, we get in these places, and people say, well, how much Icelandic blood do you have? You know, and people know, you know, they're 3/8, you know, or I'm a half, you know, and they know about this Icelandic, and they say, well, what about, you know, do you have Danish or Scottish? Oh, I don't know, you know, but the Icelandic is what's important.
In 1955, I was 3 years old, and every Icelandic family built a float, and so my sister and I were able to be on our family float. And of course, I don't remember that, but I knew that it was an important day. So for many, many years, I thought everyone in the world was an Icelander, because my grandmother, being 100% Icelandic descent, she just always taught us that there was nothing better than being an Icelander.
We call them Vestur Íslendingar in Icelandic, which literally means Western Icelanders. And the implication is we don't consider them to be Americans. They are still Icelanders, even if it was only their grandparents or their great-grandparents who were born in Iceland. It's an integral part of our history. It is not something foreign, something that is far away from us. It is an ingrained part of our own identity as a nation and as a community.
The descendants of the pioneers are really carrying the torch. And if the pioneers could have attended a celebration as you have here, for instance, they would be extremely proud, because that really meant that you people succeeded in what they really wanted and hoped for, that the heritage would stay, that it would be here forever and ever, I suppose.
20 years after the centennial celebration in Spanish Fork, the fire of the gospel would again meet the coast of Iceland. In 1974, Byron Geslason, a direct descendant of Icelandic immigrants in Spanish Fork, received a call to reopen missionary work in Iceland. At the time, Byron's twin sons David and Daniel had nearly completed their 2-year missions in Korea and Japan.
When they talked about going there, I thought, we can't go because one of our sons is in Japan and one's in Korea, and they'll be coming home, and we can't go away, you know. And but there had to be some way that he could do that. And so the way was opened.
I received a letter that was rather thick. I knew there was a lot of material in that letter, and I remember going into my apartment and then starting to read a letter from Dad stating that, you know, for the next 2 years, you and David may not be coming home. That was an exciting thing when he asked us, hey, would you guys be willing to serve another 2 years as missionaries in Iceland? And we said, absolutely, we'd love to.
We didn't have to think about it.
We didn't have to think about that at all. Like David said, it was a relief to continue our missionary effort. And so we got our calls. We got official calls a second time to go to Iceland as missionaries.
In late April 1975, the Geslasons arrived in Iceland as representatives of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. With the help of members of the NATO military branch and others, the Geslasons adapted quickly to their new surroundings.
Dad asked us if we'd like to go down to the boat harbor in Reykjavik. And you know, the clouds started to move in, and they got black and dark and ominous. And then all of a sudden, I got this ominous feeling as well, that we're starting the work in Iceland. We're beginning a great thing. And I turned to Dad and I said, Dad, this is bigger than us. And how are we gonna do this? You know, some doubt started to settle into my mind. I guess it kind of settled in with the clouds. And Dad's reply was, we don't have to worry about it. We're on the Lord's errand and He will help us.
He knew that the time would come when there'd be a church there, where they'd have their own building, and where there'd be a large group. And it was something that you could hardly envision at that time, but he knew it would be.
It was Byron's faith and love for the Icelandic people that opened many doors. Byron met with the President of Iceland, Nobel laureate Halldór Laxness, and even appeared on national television. By the end of the Geslasons' mission, the Icelanders' awareness of the church had risen out of obscurity. A branch was formed in Reykjavik with a handful of strong and dedicated members.
We had even up to 4 or 5 callings, and there was no question that we could do it all in his mind, and we did it all.
He had a way of just making everything so easy, and sometimes it felt like Byron bridged the gap. To my parents, it was a shock that I had joined a different church. To me, it was a shock that my parents weren't greeting me with open arms. They were greeting me with this question mark of, what are you doing? You know, where's your life going? You know, and Byron was a bridge between. And he had a way of doing that.
Being called as a branch president 11 months into the church, you have no idea how the church functions, what's available in material, or anything at all. And you feel like you're out in Iceland in the North Atlantic, all on your own, deserted, and you had no idea what to do or what there could be done. And then having Byron there was such a great help. He was such a wonderful man, a kind person, gentle, calm, and very loving.
The Geslissons' impact on Iceland and their tremendous influence on the saints would not end with their first mission. Byron and Melva would serve an additional 2 missions, a total of 7 years as representatives of the church in Iceland.
What marvelous service they've given. They served 3 missions and did tremendous good. Converts were few, but the attitude toward the church was one of respect that resulted in official recognition when the government recognized that we were there to stay.
The efforts of the Geslissons were honored in 1993 when Byron was recognized with Iceland's highest honor, the Order of the Falcon.
The Order of the Falcon is a gift from the nation of Iceland to pay tribute to the contribution that the individual has made to the history, the welfare, the progress of the people.
The year following Byron's death, 150 years after the first missionaries arrived in Iceland, the members experienced a landmark event. In September 2002, President Hinckley arrived in Reykjavik, the first church president to visit the saints in Iceland.
We had a fireside here at the chapel, and we had about 223 people, I think. And after the fireside was done, President Hinckley was rather casual when he was waving goodbye and talking to people. And then after the prophet had left, a lot of the members just lingered longer in the chapel. It was almost like they didn't want to leave. They didn't want to say goodbye to that feeling.
We listened to him and felt his presence and felt the strong spirit when he talked. And I think that was a moment that none of us members will ever forget.
Despite Iceland's geographical isolation, the saints continue to live their faith with the same pioneer spirit that brought their forefathers to Zion. In 2004, the Copenhagen Temple was officially dedicated for the saints in Iceland, and members frequently travel over 900 miles to attend the temple in their native tongue.
Church building, President Hinckley coming, a temple being dedicated for the use of the Icelandic people. And they're all things that are telling us that things are moving forward. We are seeing the church grow.
To have the temple and do the work for the dead, it is very fulfilling. It's all part of Heavenly Father's plan. And to giving them the opportunity to receive what we are receiving today. And to have a gateway to heaven for accepting the gospel.
The bond between the saints of Iceland and Spanish Fork was again strengthened during the sesquicentennial celebration in June of 2005. Commemorating the first pioneers that arrived in Utah, the same monument that was erected on the Westman Islands in the year 2000 was added to the Lighthouse Memorial in Spanish Fork. This granite wall lists the names of 410 Icelandic immigrants to Zion. On June 25, 2005, several thousand people attended the official dedication of the new memorial by President Gordon B. Hinckley.
Today we dedicate this beautiful and impressive monument. You did a very significant thing, you people, when you erected that monument at the Westman Isles. I express my appreciation for your strength and your goodness, your faith and your capacity, From those converts of early days has come a generation numbered in the thousands who are a credit to this nation as they honor the land of their forebears. And with the passing of the years, may there be no lessening of affection and respect for the land of fire and ice from which your people came.
I think it's vital to know our background. I think it's very important that we, again, tie into where we came from. It's something that is born within us that we want to know. What is our beginning? Where are we going?
To leave their homeland and be the first to emigrate to Zion has really caused me to reflect, not only in terms of would I have had that combination of conviction and courage, but what can I do to leave a similar legacy?
I know where every one of my ancestors are buried. Our ancestors are right here with us, and someday we'll all be together. And I just hope that they'll look down on me and say, he's the guy that put the flowers on the graves.
I like to think of the Icelandic youth being able to look to the Gudmundur Gudmundsens, the Loftur Jonssons, the Thordor Didriksens, rather than to other places, to look at their own great, noble Icelandic saints for strength and power.
The example of the early Icelandic Latter-day Saints is very important. They sacrificed a great deal. And, you know, even though we're not sacrificing monetarily like they did, we're still sacrificing spiritually.
Ég veit að himnesku faðir hefur gert áætlunarverk fyrir okkur sem okkur ber að fylgja og vinna að.
Það mikilvægt fyrir okkur að fara eftir þeim fyrirmælum sem einhver himneski faðir vill gefa okkur og veitir okkur til þess að hjálpa okkur að komast aftur til hans. Og hann gerir það gegnum spámann sinn á jörðinni sem engli forseti í dag.
Við getum fengið opinberun, svar frá Guði við öllum okkar spurningum og hverjum okkar vanda, þá getum við leyst hann með hjálp Guðs. Það vitnisburður minn. Í nafni Jesú Krists. Amen.
The most exciting thing about the history of the Icelandic saints is that it's still going on. There's room to grow, and we're moving forward. You know, Iceland is still going to be in God's hands, and it's going to be in good hands.
The DVD Fire on Ice, The Saints of Iceland and companion book can be purchased through BYU Creative Works at www.creativeworks.byu.edu, or to order by phone, call 1-800-962-8061.